What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Ricky Arnold here, and we are finally back to some tech videos. I'm so excited about it. And in this video, we are going to revamp my computer back there. And in that process, I'm going to be teaching you guys how you can build your own PC from the ground up with just a couple quick steps. And it's not going to be a completely scientific, all-conclusive how to build a PC video, but most of you will be able to get the gist of it, and you'll be able to do it on your own after seeing this video. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it, and I'll show you exactly how my process goes. Let's go. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this is not because my PC is actually outdated by any means. Honestly, I just built it probably a year or two ago, so the parts in there are still very relevant. It's got a lot of good things going for it, but there's just a couple little things that I wanted to switch out, namely the graphics card. I wanted to upgrade to something more beefy, something that would push the frame rates a little bit higher, because I like high frame rate gaming. And then I wanted to do a CPU cooler on my CPU to actually be able to overclock properly. And then, just a couple other little things like RGB, because RGB, obviously gives you those more frame rates, right? Yeah. Okay, it's just kind of like putting stickers on your car, it makes your car go faster. Same thing with the computer, you put RGB in it, your computer's faster, right? So let's go ahead and switch over to VoiceOver Ricky, and we will get right into the teardown and rebuild of my computer. And in that process, I'm going to teach you guys exactly how to build your own computer as well. So as you guys can see right here, this is my old PC, and it has definitely seen better days. So much so that you can even draw yourself a little smiley face and all the dust it's been collecting. So we're going to go ahead and clean that up with a nice little microfiber rag, clean off all the dust filters, take off all the things and spray it all out, and then we're going to get on to disassembling. And to begin disassembly, all we really need is a bit of know-how and a nice little Phillips head screwdriver. I also like to suggest that you get one of these little magnetic trays to help keep your screws from falling all over the place as well. So we're going to be revamping this build with some all new RGB components, namely some RGB fans, some lights. We're going to be putting a new CPU cooler, a new graphics card from Sapphire, and a new power supply to give ourselves some more overclocking headroom. Now, one of the first things I like to do with all my builds is actually build the entire thing outside of the case with the main components that you're going to be using and powering it on, as you can see here, just to make sure that everything actually does power on and it does function correctly before you stick it in the case. This is a great way to check your primary components and to ensure that there are no problems right off the bat that you're going to have to RMA anything for. And normally you would actually connect your graphics card to a monitor to see if a motherboard BIOS splash screen pops up to ensure that your motherboard and CPU are functioning correctly. But as I said before, I've already used this motherboard, this RAM, and this CPU before, and I know it functions perfectly, so there's no need for me to check that right now, but just keep that in mind in case you are building from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and get started from the very beginning here, and I'm going to show you exactly how to get to this point that I'm showing you right now. Okay, so starting with just the motherboard and the CPU, we're going to go ahead and look at our AMD AM4 socket, and we're going to install our CPU. So looking at this little triangle here we got in this upper right corner, we're going to go ahead and match that to a triangle that is on the CPU, and then we're going to make sure that those two triangles meet each other when we install the CPU. So I'm going to show you right here. So with one of your free fingers, you're going to open that latch there on the left side, lift it up to the top right there and just leave it. And then you're going to go ahead and match those two triangles up and simply drop the CPU into the hole. There should be no movement at all. It should all just stay in place. Then you close the latch and shut it, and that is it. Nothing else required. So the next thing we're going to do is install our RAM, and for this we're going to need our motherboard manual. and that's going to tell us which DIMM slots we're going to actually install our RAM modules into. And if you're doing a dual channel kit like I am right here, it looks like with this particular motherboard we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th RAM slots. Just make sure you line up the tick marks on the RAM modules with the actual tick marks on the RAM slot, and you're good to go. Just push them in there and wait for the click, and you're all set. Moving on from the RAM, the next thing we're going to do is install an M.2 SSD. Most all modern motherboards have a slot for this, and it is usually located right below one of your PCIe 16X slots, and it's usually just a matter of going ahead and lining up the slot, slotting it in there, waiting for a little click, and then putting it down onto your motherboard with just a single screw and a screwdriver. Most of these SSDs are very fast, and especially if you get an NVMe variant, it will definitely speed up your boot and load times for your main programs, and I highly suggest getting one if you do have the means. Next, we're going to go ahead and install a CPU cooler on top of our CPU. So if you already have the prepackaged CPU cooler that came with your CPU, then you don't have to apply any thermal paste. You just basically stick it over top of your CPU and follow the directions in the manual, and you should be good to go. But I'm going to be using my own custom CPU cooler, so I need to apply CPU thermal paste, just like I'm doing right here. So generally you just want to do the size of about a grain of rice. I added a little bit extra there, as you can see, but it's going to be alright. I already know that because I already did it, and nothing spills out, so I did just fine there. So get something kind of looking like what I got there, and you should be good to go with installing your CPU cooler. Generally speaking, the prepackaged CPU coolers are a lot more simple than the one I'm doing right here. They already come with CPU thermal paste pre-installed, so you don't have to worry about what I just did, and they usually just kind of push right into those holes that are on your motherboard for you, or connect to the motherboard standoffs that are already there. But this particular one, I have to install a black plate, and then I also have to screw the actual CPU cooler itself into the back plate, and using a star pattern to make sure I get even pressure of that thermal paste on the middle of my CPU itself. But if you do everything right there, you'll have a great new standing CPU cooler that will give you a lot more headroom to overclock with, and will also look a lot cooler as well. And next we're going to go ahead and take our power supply and connect all of the required cables that we're going to go ahead and need and plug them into their respective components. And luckily my unit right here is actually a modular unit, and most units these days are modular, or at least semi-modular. So it makes it very easy for you to connect just the cables that you do need, and keep your system very clean of those unwanted cables. So the first cable that we actually do want is going to be your 24-pin power cable, and you'll know what it is because even on a modular unit, it's usually still attached to the actual power supply itself, and it is definitely the biggest cable in the entire power supply. Next, we're going to go ahead and install our CPU power cable. So most motherboards are going to require an 8-pin CPU power cable, especially most modern motherboards. There are some that only require 4, especially if it's a big overclocking motherboard. But just for my case especially, I'm going to have to install this whole 8-pin CPU connector. So you'll see I install it into the actual power supply itself, and then I have to go up here located on the top left of the motherboard and plug it in up there. And this is probably the most overlooked power cable that some people forget, and that's why their system ends up not booting when they go to try to start it. Now on to everybody's favorite component, the graphics card. So you're going to go ahead and just slot it right into that PCIe 16X slot until you hear that nice satisfying click, and when it's set in there, you'll know it. It'll click in there and it'll be nice and tight. Then go ahead and take your PCIe power cables, however many your graphics card requires. Some only require 1, some actually require 0, but most of them require 1 or 2. Go ahead and slot those right into the proper ports and wait for the satisfying click on those as well, and you are good to go. And once you have all that done, you'll have sort of a Frankenstein looking build like you see right here. And now you're ready to try to power on and see if everything is working. Speaking of that, make sure you please plug in your power cable in the back of your power supply and actually turn the power supply on. It's going to get real awkward when you try to trip the power and you realize that you didn't turn the power supply on. I do this all the time. I'm pretty sure I just did it right here, so don't be me. And in case you're wondering what tripping the power actually means, all you do is you take a screwdriver and you make the plus and minus contact for your actual case's power on button make contact with each other by putting that screwdriver in between the two pins and making contact with them, and that will actually turn your all your components on, just like your case would if you had the button plugged in. And as you can see here, this is the best case scenario, so everything is turned on and everything is working, all the fans are spinning, all the lights are on. So from here we can go ahead and disconnect all the wires and then start putting all of our components into the case and finishing up our build. So the next step that we like to do is make sure that we prepare the case and get all of our wires the exact way we need to have them, get everything out of the way so we can install our power supply first. It's a great way to make sure you have accountability of all the cables that you're going to need for every component in your system. I like to make sure that I plug in everything I need for all of my hard drives and all of my extra components like my RGB strips and all of my lights and fans and stuff like that, so you get it all kind of consolidated. You plug in what you need into your power supply and then start installing your power supply and routing your cables. Now just keep in mind that your build may be different than mine and you're going to have a different number of components than me, so you'll use different wires and different cables to route everything up, but it's all pretty similar and it's pretty easy. Just make sure you check your manuals and you should be just fine. Just try to keep your cables consolidated in a way that they'll be out of your way when you actually go to route them on the back of your case, and it will make your life a whole lot easier at the end of your build when you start doing cable management. And if any of you are wondering why I turned my power supply upside down and I have the fan facing down, that is because there is an intake on the bottom of my case that has a dust filter for that, so it can draw in air from the bottom of the case and push it out the back of the power supply. So your case may be a top-mounted power supply setup, or if it is a bottom one just like mine, you may end up not having an intake on the bottom of your case, so you may need the fan facing up. But if your case has an intake on the bottom just like mine, then I would suggest orienting it this way. That way you can get better airflow through your components. So with your cables out of the way and your power supply oriented the right way, go ahead and just take the 4 screws that it comes with and screw them into the back of the case so it stays there nice and tight. Oh, and also don't forget to put your motherboard shield in the back of your case before you install your motherboard. It's something that's so commonly forgotten, so please don't forget it. So with all of that out of the way, because we built it outside the case already, you can take your motherboard and your other main components and already go ahead and just stick that right into your case the way it is. It makes it a lot easier on you. That way you don't have to put a CPU cooler on like mine with the motherboard inside the case, which is a huge pain. And as you can see here, I'm just routing a couple of cables and getting everything out of the way and going ahead and trying to throw my motherboard on top of the motherboard standoffs, which on my case are already pre-applied, but in most cases these days they're already there for a standard ATX motherboard or even a micro ATX motherboard, depending on your case. Once again, you may have a different case than me, but just try to go ahead and make sure that each one of those holes on your motherboard has a standoff underneath it, and make sure that there aren't too many motherboard standoffs underneath your board, because that will cause a short in your motherboard and your components will not power on if there's an extra standoff underneath your motherboard. So again, read your manual, make sure that the standoffs that are required for your particular size of motherboard are installed into your case, and you'll be good to go. You can go ahead and take your Phillips head screwdriver and screw in the required number of standoffs, which in my case here is going to be 9 of them. Now with your motherboard already installed inside of your case, you can go ahead and start reinstalling all of those cables that we previously had plugged in. Make sure you don't skip any and make sure you get them all nice and tight and firmly plugged in. And from there you can go ahead and start installing your front panel connectors, which you will need your motherboard manual for. So normally your USB 3.0 connector and your USB 2.0 connectors and your HD audio are very, very self-explanatory, and again, they're going to be right in your motherboard manual. But the only ones that usually give people a little bit of trouble are the front panel actual button little guys. They're really small little connectors, and they do take a little bit of getting used to and searching around to figure out how they work. So as I said before, you go ahead and get your motherboard manual out and check the diagram that's on there, and just make sure you look at the actual wires that are provided to you from your case, and they will say on them what exactly they are. So just match that up with the picture that's on your motherboard manual and go ahead and install it in the correct slot on your motherboard that I'm pointing to right there. Now on to everybody's favorite part of the build. Once you have all of the wires all hooked in and everything is plugged in where it should be, you can go ahead and install your graphics card back into your motherboard again in that PCIe 16X slot. You go ahead and just get it slotted in there, get it screwed down, put the two 8-pin connectors back in it, depending on your card obviously, and then you are good to go. And now hopefully that you've got everything slotted in their respective places they're supposed to go, the final thing to do is just tidy up those cables, do a little bit of cable management, and make sure that you can get those side panels on nice and flush, and make sure that you get some good airflow to your case and there's not a bunch of cables hanging on everywhere. So luckily my case right here has a lot of places to hide cables and route them, but your case obviously might be a little different. Just use what your case has and try to make sure that you get all those cables out of the way of the key components, and you should be just fine. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I tried to keep it as concise and as, short as I possibly could, but obviously a video like this is not going to be a exactly like super short video. So I was trying to be, as detailed as I could be without making it too long. But if you guys have any questions, if I left anything out, make sure you guys leave it in the comments below. I'm not perfect. I'm sure I skipped a couple things in there, or maybe you guys do something a little bit differently. So again, if you guys want to call me out, that's totally fine. Leave it in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think about my build and what I could have done differently, or what you guys would have done differently, and let's start a conversation about it. I always love to hear from you. So go ahead and make sure you guys keep it right here on this channel. I can't wait to bring the next couple videos out for you guys on this build and show you guys what this thing can actually do. So I will see you guys in the next video, which may actually be a video on this chair I'm sitting in, because I don't know if you guys even noticed. Yeah, this chair is different. Another company sent me another gaming chair, so that'll probably be the next video actually. But until then, guys, I will see you in the next video. Peace.